The gravity of the time is such that every new avenue of peace, no matter how dimly discernible, should be explored. Never before in history has so much hope for so many people been gathered together in a single organization. You will provide a great share of the wisdom, of the courage, and the faith which can bring to this world lasting peace for all nations and happiness and well-being for all men.
Hi, my name is Eric Walker, and welcome to Titans of Nuclear. Today, our guest is Roger Blomquist, and he is a principal nuclear engineer at Argonne National Laboratory. Roger, welcome.
Thank you, Eric.
So before we get into the nitty-gritty details, you want to go into a little bit of your background? How did you get started in nuclear? What led you down this career path?
So I'm a nuclear engineer by accident. Maybe that's a poor choice of words, but so I was a physics major in undergraduate school. I got my degree in 1969 and went to graduate school in physics. And we had the first Vietnam era draft lottery in late 1969. And my lottery was number one. And my dad was in World War II, earned a Purple Heart, and told me I didn't want to be infantry. And so I had a choice between letting myself get drafted for 2 years or using my physics degree in the U.S. Navy. And so that was my choice. And I became a nuclear propulsion officer on a nuclear submarine. And so that training is really, it's the best training in the world, other maybe than fighter pilot training. I don't know, but very thorough training.
That's crediting Admiral Rickover, right? That was his program.
Yes, and I met Admiral Rickover too.
Oh, that's so cool.
I had to meet Admiral Rickover. It wasn't cool, but I got through it.
I've heard his interview techniques to be somewhat unorthodox.
Yeah, he used a bully technique, and it was pretty effective. And he tried to bully me, and I'm a pretty mild-mannered guy, but I didn't cave, and I managed to escape the interview without executing myself. But anyway, so I had been a physics major, and then I was a nuclear engineer in the Navy. And when I finished my active duty after 4 years, 4.5 years, I went to graduate school at Northwestern in nuclear engineering. We had a small program, but some of our professors were very senior, top of the field people at Argonne National Laboratory. So it was a good program. And when I finished my PhD there in computing methods and reactor physics, I came to Argonne in 1979, and I've been here ever since. I just officially retired in January, but I'm still part-time. It's kind of a nice transitional arrangement. And I've worked in the physics part of nuclear engineering my whole career. So for a young person, they might say, wow, this guy really, he was thinking way ahead. But no, it was really just stuff that happened to me. And I took advantage of opportunities that came along and actually forced themselves on me. So.
Well, that's incredible. So just a couple of questions, a little bit back into your past is just in case some listeners don't know, currently all the submarines and aircraft carriers in the U.S. Navy's fleet are all nuclear powered. So that, for people who weren't aware, that's the connection there that Roger's talking about. What was life like on a nuclear sub back then? Was it? It doesn't sound to be too enjoyable.
So it's a combination of stress and boredom, but I think that's true in any kind of warfare situation. We were not in a shooting war at the time. This is the height of the Cold War. And my ship was about to run out of uranium-235. And so we did a deployment, but it was a fairly short one. It was only 3.5 months. The standard deployment then was 6 months, or if you went to the West Pacific, it was 9 months. We went across the Atlantic. So Ours was well, because of the situation, only 3.5 months. My stateroom, I was one of the most junior officers on the ship, but I had a stateroom shared with 2 other guys, and the floor space was about 2 feet by 2 feet, and that was taken up by a fold-down desk. And being the shortest guy in the stateroom, I was in the top bunk. So I had to kind of climb up and slide into my bunk like a monkey. In the bunk, you can't sit up. There isn't enough headroom, but there's a nice fluorescent reading light right above your forehead, which is very handy, except if you suddenly sit up, you would bash into the lamp. So they had a real nice sturdy grill over it, which I did plant my forehead on that a couple of times.
Wow. Yeah, 3.5 months deployment. You can't stir crazy, I feel like, is an understatement.
We were too busy to get stir crazy. And most people imagine they're claustrophobic. Really, most people are not. It's pretty unusual. And if you're busy, you know, all of this other stuff just sort of disappears into the wallpaper kind of.
Right. Okay. Well, then linking that to Argonne is, I'm sure very well you're familiar with the Argonne reactor tree.
Yes.
That picture. So for viewers and listeners, if you just go and Google the Argonne reactor tree, you'll see this pretty image that comes up. And Argonne has been pretty integral to, you know, nuclear engineering basically since the very beginning, right? The trunk of the tree on this image is CP1, the Chicago Pile 1, the world's first nuclear reactor, and then all the branches or the different types of reactors that have come off that, and one of them is the Nautilus, and so that was actually, you know, the first nuclear powered submarine, if I'm not mistaken, and that was designed by Argonne. So Argonne's been integral to, you know, the nuclear industry basically all the way back to the beginning. So looking at this, you know, this image and all these, you know, apples on the tree, all these different reactor designs and types, you know, I'm assuming you've been involved with, you know, analyzing some of them, probably working on any of them.
Well, even though I've been here a long time, at the time of those reactors were operating, I was one of the really young guys, or not here yet. So Argonne was established in 1946 to develop peaceful uses of atomic energy. So we've never done, for example, nuclear weapons work.
Right.
But Argonne did build several dozen reactors, a bunch of them here in Illinois, and a bunch of them at Argonne West in Idaho, which in the mid 2000s became part of Idaho National Laboratory. And the first reactor that generated electricity was experimental breeder reactor number 1, and that produced electricity in 1951. Now that was only 9 years after Chicago Pile 1.
Right.
If you think about innovation pace, that was a really good clip for nuclear innovation. And for a long time, well, we've gone through a long period when the innovation was not very active, and we're back into that zone again, fortunately. But I've seen a few of those reactors. I never operated any of the Argonne reactors, even though I had operational experience. I came here as a reactor physicist, so.
Okay, I see. So when Argonne split, Argonne West became Idaho National Lab. So a lot of those reactors that were built and designed by Argonne are now in the, you know, under the purview of Idaho National Lab.
Yeah, actually, most of them were already, they'd met their missions by then and were shut down. There were several that were still operating, and one of them has been resurrected from standby treat, which is a fabulous fuel test reactor. You can put fuel in it that you want to test and drive it to destruction and see how it fails, understand all the physics and chemistry of fuel failure and so forth. And there's a couple of others, one other that was a physics test physics experiment reactor that's still in standby. But the way our reactor program has worked over the decades is you build a reactor to test a certain concept or to generate a certain set of experimental data. And then when you finish that, then the question is, well, can I use this reactor for something else we hadn't thought of originally? Or, you know, is it just a big drain on our resources and we need to kind of shut it down and do something better? So that's kind of the way those considerations were made. But a lot of our, as I said, a lot of our reactors, the more edgy ones were built in Idaho.
Right. Okay. So I had a little experience in the national lab space. For grad school, I was a contractor at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. And then after my postdoc, was hired on as a staff scientist for a few years. And it's a very similar situation at Oak Ridge, where it started, you know, wartime with the graphite reactor. But then over the years, there have been, you know, numerous reactors that have been built and operated on site that, you know, have seen the end of their you know, useful life. And currently, there's only, I believe, one still operating on Oak Ridge's reservation, and that's the high flux isotope reactor. So, are there any of the Argonne reactors still operating or active?
None in Illinois.
Okay.
In fact, we had a Chicago Pile 5, which was CP5, which was a heavy water reactor used for training reactor operators for the civil nuclear, the emerging civil nuclear electricity business in the U.S., but also a lot of neutron physics experiments. That one has been greenfield decommissioned. That was the first greenfield decommissioning of a reactor in the United States. We are actually using some of the other facilities that contained some of our critical reactors, zero power reactors. Zero is not perfectly correct. It's just so low power, you don't need a cooling system, which makes your whole experiment way cheaper.
Right.
Anyway, so we're still using those cells for other kinds of experiments that may involve a lot of energy, like high power lasers or potentially vigorous chemical reactions.
So you touched on a point that I'd like to go in a little further, is the greenfield decommissioning. So that's you know, something that we want to strive for, but you don't hear that too much. Could you just explain to those who don't know what that means and how that's accomplished?
So yeah, greenfield sort of a descriptor that you return the site to what it was before they first broke ground to build the facility. So that's the kind of the holy grail of decommissioning. I personally have reservations as to whether that is always a good idea, because there's such a thing as brownfield industrial facilities where you reuse industrial property that has satisfied its first mission for some other purpose, and it's way cheaper to do that than to start with a greenfield somewhere else. And so that is one of the considerations that needs to be made. Greenfield is something that people want to insist on, but it's expensive. And there's a good question as to whether or not that is overall a good approach. In some cases, I'm sure it is, but in others, there may be better uses for that property or facility.
Right. And it's a testament to, you know, these sites that have nuclear facilities on them can be returned back to, you know, the state that they were before the facility. So the notion that once, you know, a nuclear facility is in a location, it's contaminated for all time and there's nothing we can do and it completely ruins the environment is just a fallacy.
Yes, exactly.
That's I think an important point to touch on. So then you're at Argonne, and now, you know, part-time at Argonne, but I see that you've sort of moved into a public speaking sort of realm. Would you like to go a little more in detail into that?
Yeah, so I worked quietly as an engineer for decades and listened to all the public discourse on nuclear energy, and I understood for a fact that a lot of it were distortions, exaggerations, or worse. And it was pretty annoying, but engineers kind of like to, we know what we do is good work and it stands by itself. And we don't want to argue with people who think what we're doing is dumb or evil or bad or, you know, somehow negative, generally because they don't know what they're talking about really. So it's not, we have never considered that a constructive way to spend our time. But eventually it wore me down. I got tired of it. And then, so I started giving a few talks to civic groups and so forth. And then Fukushima happened, and now there's a public hysteria. And the lab gave me some media training. So I was then authorized to talk to reporters and stuff. And so I found that was enjoyable. It wasn't always successful in my view in terms of conveying to the public what I wanted to say, but it was still worthwhile and an interesting mind game if your reporter is acting like an opponent. So I've been doing a fair amount of that. I don't talk to reporters every month, but you know, I probably talk to one or two every year. And I have talked to more civic groups, and I give a lot of tours. We have a fabulous nuclear energy exhibition hall here. And I give tours to groups that come in, like college science and engineering students, or even art students, and VIPs. So I've done a lot of talking about all this stuff, and I've also thought a lot about analogies that are understandable to people who are not engineers that will help them really comprehend, you know, the issues in a broad sense.
Have you found it difficult, you know, conveying some of the, you know, the finer aspects to like a non-technical audience, to get them to understand? Like using analogies is a good, you know, way to do that. But have you found it difficult to communicate, or are people generally pretty receptive to your talks?
Well, generally the people I'm talking to are receptive. Certainly the ones who come to the lab to see the exhibit, they are. Outside the civic groups, it's a variety of different attitudes or preconceived notions that people come with. It is hard to convey details. So when I'm talking to public groups, I try to keep things at a very high level. And I try to use analogies, and I also try to engage them to get them to ask the questions, because what I really want to do is answer their questions. I don't want death by PowerPoint. I can do that, but after a while, you know, and I tell people, you know, if I'm asking you to be my referee on jargon alerts. So if I say something that's jargon, I want you to raise a yellow card, and I'm still looking for a yellow card I can hand out. But anyway, you know, and that sort of humanizes things too. And I give a little bit about my background, and I think that's humanizing. And I try to use humor and everyday analogies, like I compare the chain reaction, the neutron chain reaction, to the money chain reaction that our economy is, for example. So it is challenging, and it takes some practice. And you think of these analogies and ways of presenting information, you know, with repetition.
Right. So have you, you know, either dealing with reporters or dealing with, say, a listener who isn't as, you know, supportive of nuclear energy as we are, have you ever had, you know, like misinformation or been misquoted, and how did you combat that? How did you fight back against, you know, maybe a mischaracterization of something you might have said?
So by a journalist who's anti-nuclear, I've never been misquoted, but I have ended up on the cutting room floor because I didn't say what they wanted me to say. Because in a lot of cases, a journalist comes with a story idea, and he's gathering evidence to support the story idea. This is the liberal arts technique, and I'm not disrespecting liberal arts, but the whole idea of writing a paper is state your position and support it. If it's expository writing, that's a little bit different from an engineering and science approach. Is well, you have your hypothesis, prove it or disprove it. So there are two options there.
Right.
And there was one case where I was supposed to be on Mysteries at the Museum, and it was I spent an hour and a half or two with the producer who was interviewing me about how dangerous the Chicago Pile 1 experiment was, which it wasn't. I mean, it had its risks, but it wasn't dangerous. And I refused to say it was dangerous. And so she got someone else to do the entire episode. And I'm proud of that.
Right. Yeah, you didn't want to be used to propagate a story that just isn't true.
Exactly.
So for your public speaking, obviously, I also agree it's extremely important. Nuclear is somewhat of a siloed industry where if you're in, you understand, and there's somewhat of a everybody knows type of mentality. So being able to communicate with those not in the nuclear industry, but also non-technical, is extremely important. And I was just wondering how would others in the industry start to get involved in communication and just educating the public in general? Do you have any recommendations for how to get involved and how to start hopefully disproving some of the myths that are out there?
So actually, there are a lot of pro-nuclear groups that have a variety of let's say technical competencies amongst their members. Competencies, not competences. So I think one of them is Atomic Illinois or something like that. They're kind of all over the place now. They don't have any budgets to speak of compared to the anti-nuclear organizations, which are funded to the tune of, let's see, I got to count the digits, 9 digits or more annually. But these groups are pretty effective. Given the resources that go into them. The industry doesn't generally support them, so they are fairly independent. If I guess I could make a list. If there's a list you can post on the podcast thing, I could come up with one.
Okay, yeah, I'm aware of a few out there, and I know there's
Yeah, you probably are. Yeah.
There's a lot of grassroots organizations that are out there that
Yeah.
people you can Google them and try and get involved and see if there's rallies or events. Recently here in just outside Oak Ridge, the NRC had a public meeting about a potential use over near the Oak Ridge Reservation, and it was pretty well attended by pro-nuclear folks. You'd expect there were a couple anti-nuclear folks there, but the word got out, and there was enough pro-nuclear support there that it was the overwhelming majority of those there were in favor of pro-nuclear. I
also do a lot on social media, specifically Facebook, which proves that I'm a boomer. But anyway, so I try to present technical information, and I have a pocket protector rating, a nerd rating of on a scale of 0 to 5 pocket protectors. And if it's a really very technical article, I'll say, well, this is 5 pocket protectors, but you can read the first 2 paragraphs and the conclusion and mostly understand it. So I want to, it kind of humanizes things too, because even people like you and me with advanced degrees have trouble understanding stuff that's outside of our lane. It's a lot of hard work to do so.
Right.
And that's and it's sort of a joke too, because I'm a nerd. So there we go. And proud of it.
Yeah, exactly. So on the back to that, I wanted to get more into the nitty gritty details. So I'm a reactor physicist as well. So I'm very intrigued by your work. I see that you've done, reactor physics work, Monte Carlo. I was hoping you could add a couple of pocket protectors to the talk at this point, and maybe get a little more technically detailed as to the type of work that you've done in the past at Argonne and are still doing currently.
Okay, so scaling up the pocket protectors. So I became the developer of Argonne's Monte Carlo code, which I didn't write, but I was to maintain and upgrade it and keep up to date with the neutron cross section revisions. And this code was used for analyzing our critical facilities, which had a very nice simple geometry. And so the code would run pretty fast. So I ended up working with one of the leading lights in resonance theory, neutron resonance theory, Richard Wong, whose office is next door to mine. And he was a real math genius. And I'm pretty good at math, but I'm orders of magnitude less than him. So I had the privilege of working with some great people. Another one is Eli Gelbard, who wrote the book on Monte Carlo neutronics while he was at Bettis. And so he was sort of my technical big brother here at Argonne, because I had no training in Monte Carlo. I was basically handed this job and saying, here, make it work. So, but that went on for quite a while. And then I got involved with criticality safety analysis because one of my colleagues was analyzing a heterogeneous core fast reactor and had a situation where the result was clearly wrong. And so the question was, why is this wrong? And it turns out it's the inability for neutrons to get from one part of this heterogeneous reactor to the other. And it made the whole thing very tilty. In total, in five pocket protector nerd terms, the eigenvalue separation between the principal and the first eigenvalue was very small.
Okay.
And so I ended up chairing a group at Nuclear Energy Agency, an expert group on problematic calculations, Monte Carlo calculations, and nuclear criticality safety. And it turns out there are a number of cases where this is an issue. And I worked with a group that came up with a set of test problems that are very, very challenging for Monte Carlo codes. And actually, they're pretty challenging for deterministic codes too. And so these have been used now for decades to help people evaluate things like acceleration techniques and ways to avoid putting all the source particles in the lower reactivity region of a criticality safety analysis problem.
Right. Okay. And just to test myself, is that that ratio of the zeroth and the first eigenvalue? That's the dominance ratio, correct?
Yes, it is. In fact, I'd forgotten that term. Thank you for reminding me. It's the dominance ratio, and then the dominance ratio is close to 1. Then you have to be very, very careful about converging your solution.
Correct. Yeah, that's a 5 pocket booker, pocket protector for sure.
Yeah.
So you touched on a lot of the talent that is just literally next door to your office. I've found that one of the strengths of the national labs is it's really a just the best of the best all in one place, but not necessarily all the best in the same area. So you can, like you were saying, you have a great physicists, great mathematicians, and they're all different backgrounds, different trainings, but they're all working together towards these same problems. So I was hoping you could speak a little bit to the benefits of these big multidisciplinary teams that are ingrained in the national lab.
Yeah, that's exactly the case. And if even in your own lane, if you want to do something you haven't done before, there might be somebody down the hall who has done something like it. And instead of doing a big literature research, you can just go say, hey, Jack, have you ever tried this? And that's what I did with Eli quite a bit. He'd say, well, that was done in 1958 and it didn't work because of X, you know. So it's actually a force multiplier. And then there are the people, as you mentioned, in the other areas that I work with, cross-section experts and thermal hydraulics people too. I worked a little bit in thermal hydraulics also. And lately I've sort of morphed into reactor design, research reactor design. And so those are areas that I didn't know much about. And so there were people here who could help me get past roadblocks, or, you know, give me quick answers to important questions that would smooth my path. And I've also just inherently interested in reactor safety. And so I've always taken the trouble to go to the many colloquia and seminars that we have on things like subjects like reactor safety. Now it's advanced reactors and SMRs. And so we have people from these companies and other labs come and give talks. And so it's a benefit, not just to the work, but to me, that I can learn this other stuff. And that's peripheral to what I'm doing in my lane, but it's important for me to understand in the overall picture. And that was one of the big lessons that the Navy teaches people is, you need to understand what's going to happen to the core if you adjust the speed of the condensate pump, you know, 2 fluid systems away. And so viewing a reactor as an organic whole is a very worthwhile understanding.
Right. And also that interdisciplinary, you know, benefit that the national labs have is also beneficial for, you know, private companies and other industries, not only in nuclear. Having different technical experiences and different, you know, trainings, education, viewpoints is you know, very beneficial to any organization doing any type of technical work to get those different perspectives.
Yeah, they're useful even in policy arguments too. So you know, people claim that batteries are going to allow us to use wind and solar, and I'm still asking people the question, well, okay, now we have inverters. You tell me we have inverters that follow the frequency, but we don't need to follow the frequency. We need to set the frequency. Where is the energy coming in a wind turbine to set the frequency when the load goes up or some of the wind turbines drop offline? And so it equips having exposure to these other areas. And in this case, the Navy was particularly valuable because on the ship, I was also running the electric company when I was on watch. I ran the electric company. I ran the propulsion plant. And so I understand something about microgrids because we had a microgrid. And so that puts me in a good position to ask questions of people who are making press release type claims, which seems to be the common mode today in communicating policy discussions.
Right. So back to a comment that you made earlier, some of the work that you've gotten into is criticality safety. So for those who might not know what it is, would you just what it is and kind of give some examples of, you know, either criticality safety stories that you personally experienced, or, you know, some of the famous ones that are out there, just to give people an idea?
Yeah, that's criticality safety is a very tricky field and a very important one. In a reactor, generally a reactor is built so that when it's all put together, all the materials are in there, then you can make it critical, but it's easy to make it subcritical. So almost anything that happens to the reactor will make it subcritical. Like if the temperature goes up, then the neutron chain reaction will naturally be reduced a little bit. And so that's what stability is. And so that's how we design reactors. But if you're processing nuclear materials in a chemical plant or shipping chunks of fissionable material around, now the conditions are not so regular, and criticality safety is the art and science of avoiding a situation where you have too much fissionable material in one place at one time. And there are lots of ways of doing that, and there needs to be analysis to support that. So that was my role, was to work on these analytical techniques. But while I was in that area, there was an accident in Japan that had fatalities, and this was a procedural accident. There was a system that was designed for handling chemical solutions of uranium that was enriched to up to 5%. And because there was insufficient management oversight and following safety procedures, they were using it higher than 5%. And they actually had a criticality excursion when there were three operators right next to the tank where this occurred, and there was no shielding. And so I think 2 of them got killed, and there was a radiation release, which was very scary for people. As I recall, it was not harmful to human health in the neighborhood or anything, but this was a really big deal. And it turns out there have been many criticality accidents, and almost none of them involve reactors. They're pretty much all in processing plants. There's one funny one where everyone remembers from their high school chemistry class having an electric stirrer with a little magnet in the bottom of the beaker, and it sits on something that spins the magnetic field, which turns that little agitator, and that stirs up the solution. And somebody filled the system with fissionable material, or had a layer of fissionable material, and it was subcritical, but when they started the stir, it went supercritical. So who'd think that throwing a switch would make something supercritical? So again, just like in a nuclear reactor, you have to view this whole system as in an organic way, and think about all the failure modes and so forth, and size your containers in such a way that there's no way it could ever go critical, for example. That's one common technique. Have the container so small that no way can criticality be achieved.
Right. Another topic I wanted to speak about was something that, I think is a little unique to the national labs is, how you get started on projects, how projects get to the labs, proposals and funding. It's all something to, someone who works for a private company might sound kind of foreign. So I was hoping you could just go at a high level, just how projects and the national labs work together.
So I think over the history of the national labs, and certainly over Argonne's history, this has evolved quite a bit. At the beginning, Argonne was told, go explore reactors for civil use. And so Argonne built all kinds of different types of experimental and test reactors, and some prototypes and so forth. But it's been over the last, by the time I came, then projects were being managed at the Department of Energy. When I first came to the lab, essentially there was a breeder reactor program that the lab managed. So if we needed somebody to work on this one particular kind of computer code, the managers would just find somebody and say, okay, this is your project now. Now it's more like there are requests for proposals from the Department of Energy or NRC or whomever. And so we sort of compete. I mean, the national labs each kind of have their own lanes that they're particularly strong in. So it's not capitalism raw in tooth in terms of competition. And there's a lot of collaboration among labs too, because we have different lanes. But now the DOE program managers, we give them deliverables and so forth and so on, progress reports and all that stuff. Formerly, I think much more of that was inside each of the labs. Now it's much more centralized in the funding institutions. But that means that some of these projects reflect external needs that the labs haven't necessarily thought of. And one good example of that is the Iran nuclear deal, which I had the privilege to work on. That was my first reactor design project. And that's a response to a geopolitical issue where Iran was building a research reactor that the question was, is this a plutonium production nuclear weapons proliferation threat? So, and we established in very short order, yes, it was. And so that morphed into, we were supporting providing the State Department with, and the interagency team actually with technical information, real truth about their reactor design and what it could do. And so we supported the negotiations, and then we worked on the project with evaluating the Iranians' response to the requirement that they redesign their reactor. And so that's an external motivation for this work in particular. But out of that has come a program that we're just kind of getting started on, involving sort of an organic look at the nuclear proliferation characteristics of any nuclear system that's proposed, and with the idea of kind of designing in from the very beginning, the ground up, features, design features, configurations, whatever other aspects of design that would make it hard for a nuclear system to be misused.
Gotcha. Yeah, so that's, just goes to show the types of, external sources that, can direct work at the national labs. It's not only, industry or DOE space. There's all sorts of external influences that can help shape and direct the national labs efforts.
Yeah, we're also paid by the Department of Energy to work with a lot of these innovative reactor companies, especially in advanced reactor technology, because we have the experiments that provide the information and also the heavily tested computer programs that analyze those experiments that they can use to do their design analysis and safety analyses. So we do quite a bit of that too.
Right.
That's externally driven.
Right. So a curious question I have is, the nuclear space is pretty large. We've touched on multiple different, aspects and areas of expertise within it. Is there, you've had a long career. Are there any parts of the nuclear field that you get to work very much in, that you had a strong interest in, or is there anything, maybe future work that you're hopefully can get more involved in?
Well, probably not for me, but for maybe people interested in the field. I think material science is always going to be a good field in nuclear, because nuclear fuel, a reactor is a pile of hot rocks that's configured to be able to keep it cool and extract the heat to use to make money, or to produce the neutrons that you can use in experiments in the case of research reactors. And we're trying to improve the performance of those in various ways, and that involves a lot of material science, particularly fuel behaviors, but also there's corrosion chemistry and a lot of other areas that are very important, that aren't really nuclear engineering, but they're a part of nuclear engineering. That's a great thing about nuclear engineering, because there's so many disciplines that have to interact. And that's true in aerospace as well, but I think it's particularly true in nuclear engineering, because we have radiation effects on materials, which is almost unique.
Yeah, that's another layer of complexity that nuclear has to worry about.
Yes.
And to your point on material science and technology, is fusion reactors is a very similar thing. There's a lot of research for the next generation of fusion reactors, getting materials that can withstand those types of environments, because We haven't had as much experience in the fusion space as in the fission space. So that material science is critically important there as well.
And maybe another order of magnitude more challenging.
Yes.
Than in a fission reactor.
Right. Yeah, I agree. So I wanted to finish off with just some like high level, just questions, some general, roll back the pocketbooks a little bit. What is like your view of, and not just Argonne, but all national labs, and how would you characterize like their importance, not only to, the United States, but just nuclear energy? Because national labs aren't only nuclear labs, they're Department of Energy labs. There's all types of research that's going on there, but how vitally important do you feel the national labs are to the nuclear energy space?
So I think they're crucial. And one reason is historical, because this is where most of the R&D has been done over the decades. But that leaves open the question of the future. But then a lot of that experimental legacy is really what we're building into the future, because we've been sort of stuck in the light water reactor mode now for 60 years, really, in terms of commercial applications. And that seems to be on the cusp of a major change right now. And so I think we can provide those that experimental data, the modeling, the models, and so forth that are derived from or tested against those data for all kinds of different reactors and applications, because reactor applications are changing now too. A lot of the advanced reactors are targeting industrial process heat as a means of decarbonizing industry, where they're burning gas for heat now, which of course is a carbon pollutant, CO2 pollutant, and also nitrous oxides. But so there are more missions that are being envisioned for power reactors now than there was 20 years ago, at least in the public policy sphere. Nuclear engineers have been thinking about this stuff for a long time as potential applications, but now the interest in decarbonization, I think, is opening a lot of minds. And we do experiments here in support of these companies too. So our experimental facilities, which are too big, too complicated, and for a university possibly too risky to run, national labs do that. A university has an endowment, especially a major research university, and if they are doing experiments that have some sort of associated financial risk, then that's a consideration they have to weigh carefully. And that's one role the national labs play. And we have huge facilities here, like the advanced photon source that we use for evaluating and studying nuclear fuel and structural materials with radiation damage, for example. That's $1 billion machine. So show me a university that's going to build and operate $1 billion machine. There are a few, but not many. So that's one of the roles that the national labs can play.
Yeah, and that you touched on it perfectly. That was the point I was trying to drive home. Is there's a critical spot, a critical void that national labs fill, that really private industry and universities either can't or don't want to take the risk to do those types of research.
Yeah, there's commercial strategy that a company has on how they're going to get their product to market and so forth. But then there's a sort of a scientific strategy too, as what is it we need to know more about. And so Atlas is another one of those at Argonne. It's a heavy ion accelerator. It can accelerate uranium ions and hurl them into targets. It's a nuclear physics facility, but it is also used for evaluating the behavior of materials in reactor fuel, because guess what? Fission products are heavy ions. And so we can, for example, we can accelerate xenon items into fuels and see how the fuels behave at various temperatures and study their behavior in a non-radiological way. So that makes the R&D, the science part of it, way cheaper.
Right.
And faster, much faster turnaround time.
Yep. Cheap, faster, which are both, you know, nuclear industry. Those are both good things.
Yep.
So we touched on it briefly. Circle back a little bit is, you know, you mentioned earlier Fukushima. I think, finishing my junior year of undergrad when Fukushima happened. And that was sort of, you know, the nuclear industry at that time was pretty rocky. There was a lot of, you know, we weren't sure. There was talk of a nuclear renaissance, then Fukushima happened, and things got pretty dicey. So I was just wondering what your perspective is on the nuclear industry as it stands, you know, today, as opposed to back then. You know, the trajectory that we're going in, sort of the current state of the industry as a whole, and where you see it going.
There isn't an industry as a whole. I think there are several industries, and it's conceptually, I think it's worth distinguishing. So we have the current commercial reactors, and they're perfectly good. They're safe. They've never hurt anybody anywhere, or light water reactors, and they're efficient. They're economical as long as the electricity markets aren't buggered, which unfortunately I believe they are.
Yep.
So they are doing some innovation with fuels, working on economics, improving burnups perhaps. There are efforts underway to do things like that, and those are all good. They're incremental. Then there's the other part, and they are owned by companies with stockholders typically. So they're publicly traded companies. So they have a quarterly earnings issue they need to consider, because that's the way our financial markets work in the United States. They are also geographically fragmented. So we have Exelon, which owns a bunch of reactors in Illinois and a bunch of reactors over on the East Coast. Well, now it's Constellation, I guess.
Right.
And in the Southeast, we've got still a bunch of regulated utilities, where those regulated utilities are responsible for strategic resource planning. So there's a couple of different wrinkles on how we're currently implementing nuclear energy. But the other part is, now we have venture capitalist funds or money supporting these advanced reactors and small reactors. And the small modular reactors, their role is A, in the export market, which will come chronologically first, if you ask me, but and B, a reduction in the amount of money a regulated or a current U.S. utility would have to lay on the table to commit to building a reactor. And right now, with the big reactors, that's kind of at a bet the company scale, and the small modular reactors will reduce the size of that bet. And so I think that's an artificial incentive for us to pursue small modular reactors. There are other incentives, but that one is artificial. But that's the world we're in right now.
Right.
And we, of course, have deindustrialized. In this country, we've generally gotten away from mining anything. And so we're going to have to, not just nuclear stuff, but battery materials, uranium, all kinds of materials. I think we need to seriously reconsider why, or to what the advantage is for us to outsource that mining to countries with lower environmental standards. And now strategic materials are a big public policy concern, and they should be. You know, now it's understood they're more of it's a national security issue in a way that it wasn't understood 5 years ago.
Absolutely. Well, Roger, we're, I think, maybe a little over. I apologize for taking so much of your time. One last comment is if there was anything that you would like to share with our listeners just about nuclear as a whole, anything that we didn't touch on, you know, if there was a specific point you wanted to drive home that, you know, we didn't get to spend too much time on. Just one final thought from you.
So yeah, it's a hope, and the hope is that all of the impediments to the implementation of nuclear technology, especially new nuclear technology, that have been put in place, like state bans on new nuclear reactors, changes in regulations that were developed over time in support of regulating light water reactors. There's a whole host of these political, regulatory, economic, marketing aspects to nuclear energy that we are going to need to unwind many of those. And I think it's going to take a long time, but people in the nuclear business and all aspects of it and concerned citizens need to get involved in untangling that basically big spaghetti bowl of complications that is slowing down innovation and implementation and decarbonization.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. That was perfectly said. So, Roger, I want to thank you again for joining us today as our guest on Titans of Nuclear. And if anybody ever is up near Argonne, we'll reach out to you for.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Roger, thank you very much.
And initiate at least a new approach to the many difficult problems that must be solved in both private and public conversation if the world is to shake off the inertia imposed by fear and is to make positive progress toward peace.